gentlemen, if I can have you take your seats, please. Sorry, Andy. We're going to get started. I'd like to mention, first of all, if you have not signed in, there is a sign-up sheet on the blue clipboard by the door. David Singer just breezed right by without signing it. I'm going to snag him. We're just trying to make sure that we document community participation. So if you have not signed this blue clipboard, please do. My name is Lisa Branner. I am the Community Relations Manager for the town of Silverton, and I have been working with a committee of 8+ people over most of the last year on the Silverton Area Trails Plan, the update to that. I want to mention that I am not, just because I'm standing up here tonight presenting, this is not all me. There's a group of community members that have been involved in this, and this is all based on community feedback that we received through community visioning sessions. So it has been a full public process and will continue to be so the whole way through. And we are streaming tonight on Facebook Live. So if you know folks who were not able to join us tonight, let them know that the video will be posted both on Facebook, on the Town of Silverton, our Silverton Town Hall Facebook page, and also on the town's website. So our agenda for tonight, we're going to recap the planning efforts that have been made to date. I'm going to present the draft of the 2019 Trails Plan, and we are going to look to gather some community feedback. Before we get started, I always like to just lay out some ground rules. I want to remind everybody that this is a community, and it's really important for us to be respectful. Let's try to find common ground and come at this from a position of compromise and sharing. I know often in this community we get really passionate about things, and so I'm just going to ask you to try to come back to these ground rules if you find yourself getting a little too excited. So why are we here? Trails have been identified as a priority in this community in a number of different planning documents and planning processes. As you may know, the town has been doing visioning sessions for the Kendall Mountain Recreation Area and the master planning process around that. And trails were identified. We asked about year-round usage. So for summertime, trails were identified as the #1 priority by the community. They wanted to see more mountain biking and hiking trails at Kendall Mountain. In addition to that, we've got the 2004 Silverton Area Trails Plan. This document obviously has been kicking around for a while but hasn't had an update. And that's what the goal here is, but obviously that plan is talking very much about the non-motorized trails in San Juan County and what we might do for those audiences. The Silverton and San Juan County Master Plan, the last time it was revisited was in 2010. It is currently being revisited right now. So that particular document also identifies trails, and in particular it calls out a mix of motorized and non-motorized trails in the county to accommodate all users. Our Community Development Action Plan, which is a living document that's updated by a lot of different entities in the community. That basically is an ongoing list of goals that we check in with periodically. Trails are mentioned there, and then a recent project, Blueprint 2.0 study done by San Juan Development Association also calls out trails. So that's why we're here. And we're hoping that our efforts as a community are going to inform a variety of different planning efforts. So I mentioned the Kendall Mountain Master Plan and the County Master Plan. In addition to that, the Bureau of Land Management is about to start their travel management planning process. And within the next few years, the Columbine Ranger District for the Forest Service is going to be working on their recreation plan and updating that. And so we're hoping that our efforts will dovetail with those things and help inform them. So why outdoor rec? Why are we even having the conversation about trails and recreation in our community? We've been having a lot of conversation in recent years about diversifying our economy, and outdoor recreation is a huge economic driver nationwide as well as in Colorado. So we're talking about 2% of the GDP is attributed to the outdoor recreation industry. In Colorado, that represents $28 billion in consumer spending annually, almost 230,000 jobs, 9.7 billion in wages and salaries, and then state and local tax revenues of about 2 billion. So definitely something that our community already has a lot of is outdoor rec, and we're looking at ways to kind of bolster our efforts. So the outdoor recreation economy, as defined by the Outdoor Industry Association, which is the organization that provided those stats in the previous slide, these guys define these activities as the outdoor rec economy. So it's camping, fishing, hunting, motorcycling, off-roading, snow sports, trail sports, water sports, wheel sports, and wildlife viewing. Obviously, we have a lot of this happening in San Juan County. Our trails planning focus, however, for this effort has been on non-motorized recreation. That was the main thrust of the 2004 plan. And the reason for that, as I mentioned before, is that we're looking to diversify our tourism economy. So the target audiences we're looking at are pedestrians, bikers, and equestrians. And I just want to mention that doesn't mean that we don't have a robust motorized community here and that they aren't making contributions to our economy, because they are. And so I don't see this as an either or, but I see it as a yes and. We're looking to supplement what we already have. I think we're doing a great job of embracing the motorized community, and we could maybe do a little more for these audiences, and that seems to be the feedback that we're hearing from our community as well. Woo. Efforts to date. So 3 trails visioning sessions happened in the past year, February, May, and August. We invited the entire community to come out and participate. We had between 30 and 35 folks show up at each of those. Our goals were to catalog the existing trails that we have in San Juan County, as well as to identify potential new trails and connectors. And then from there, we formed a trails task force, and this was 8 different entities based in Silverton and San Juan County. Town of Silverton, obviously, I represented the town in certain regards, but I also want to mention that our Director of Planning, Mark Revis, and our Parks, Facilities, and Recreation Director, Todd Bove, were very involved in this process. For San Juan County, Commissioner Pete McKay was very involved. Our Planning Commission representative was Ken Safransky. We had Melanie Russick from San Juan Development Association, our local economic development agency. Our Chamber of Commerce, Deanne Gallegos. Silverton Single Track Society, Jared Boyd represented them. That's our local mountain biking group. Hard Rock 100 was Charlie Thorne, and he's their course director. And then Mountain Studies Institute, we have Anthony Culpepper in the house tonight, who's helped with a lot of the mapping. So if you guys have questions, you might search him out. He can probably explain some of that a little better than I can. So the priorities that this group looked at as we started this process of distilling the information we collected from the community, obviously the diversified economy, but we also wanted to do things that would improve the quality of life for our community members. So it's not just about bringing visitors here, that's an important piece of the equation, but this also has to be something that improves the quality of life for our citizens. We focused on things that we wanted to see adopted as system trails, meaning that the land managers, either the Forest Service or the BLM, might adopt them into their systems and therefore recognize them. They could appear on maps. We could get assistance in maintaining them. Connectivity to the Colorado Trail is a big one. That was something that was called out in the 2004 plan and continues to be something the community really wants to see. And then we had a focus on trying to reduce friction between users. And I do want to say that we're really fortunate here. We don't have the type of user conflict, so to speak, that you might have in a much more populated place like the Front Range. But nevertheless, we're trying to make sure that all our different users are being taken care of and that we're listening to everybody. So from there, we distilled this information into a 2019 draft plan that builds on the 2004 plan. We have prioritized 14 project areas and 10 connector trails. We are looking at Silverton as a hub or a base camp for all of the activity. So basically the jumping off point for people to go out into the county. And the idea there is if we provide easy access right from town to all of these amazing trails, that people will come here and stay here for a number of days, which translates into hotel stays, dining, shopping, etc., and bolsters the economy. Something that was not particularly focused on in the 2004 plan was mountain biking. We spent a good deal of time talking about mountain biking and how it fits into the equation going forward. Mountain biking has been transformative for a lot of communities that were struggling economically, and many of our neighbors are really capitalizing on it. Ridgeway is a great example. If you look at what the town of Fruita was like 30 years ago versus what it's like now, you can see the transformative power of trails, and in particular, embracing the mountain biking community. So we do have a little bit of an emphasis on mountain biking in the 2019 plan. The other thing that came out of all of these conversations and efforts, I think we had 8 meetings and some focus group meetings as a task force, was that we wanted to mitigate user conflicts rather than restrict uses. So trying as much as possible to embrace all our different user groups. So other considerations the group talked about, ice and island lakes. I just want to say for the most part, you know, in the previous slide I said we're talking about not really restricting uses. That's maybe one example in this plan where we suggest something that would be pulling back on what's currently allowed. And the recommendation there is that possibly we should not be allowing mountain biking on those trails. Reason being, they are already overcrowded. The user experience is being degraded just by the number of people on them. And that would be one thing that we could do to mitigate impacts on that particular trail. The other thing that the group discussed at length was the need for education so that people understood trail etiquette and could be good neighbors and good trail users. So that'll be something as we go forward with any trail planning efforts. We'll be looking at ways to incorporate that kind of stuff into those plans, and then also a need for signage and maps. We don't have a whole lot of informational kiosks or signage telling people where to go. They come to town and they're confused. Those of you that work at the Public Land Center or have worked at the Visitor Center know this. People don't know where to go. So providing better direction for people through signage and maps. And then we wrestled with the question of electric bikes quite a bit. And right now they are considered motorized. And until that usage changes, I think the group just wanted to be hanging back and watching how things unfold. There are communities that are experimenting with allowing e-bikes on their non-motorized trail systems. I think it's too early to say, and the task force committee kind of agreed, it's too early to say how that's going to work out. Let's learn from their example is what we all kind of came to a conclusion, and see how it unfolds in other communities before we jump on that bandwagon. So those are some of the other considerations or recommendations that came out of those discussions. So to be clear about our terminology tonight, what is a project? Basically, we are looking at areas that have been identified for future trail work or development. And you'll see the map hanging over there. There's one out in the lobby as well. They're kind of these shaded blobs or polygons on the map. We're not at this point getting super specific in terms of defining trail alignment. So how do you get from point A to point B? Some of the projects have that level of specificity, but most do not. And I think that there will be a lot more research and planning needed for all of these different identified projects. So we're going to jump into talking very briefly about each of the 14 projects. And I will say after we're done with the presentation tonight, I've got printed copies of the plan, both over here, there's a station, and out in the lobby. I encourage you all to take a peek at that, look at the maps. If you haven't had a chance, I did just email out today that this information is all available online, as well as an interactive map that you can zoom in and out of and really get detailed information. So you may want to check that out because I'm going to breeze through this pretty quick, and you'll get a lot more meat and potatoes out of the actual written document than you will out of my presentation tonight. So project number 1 is the Silverton Perimeter Trail, and we're basically talking about, a lot of this exists, but there are some gaps. We're trying to link up a route that goes around Silverton so Silverton can serve as that hub. The idea being that if we have an urban trail network, and you can hike from your front door to this perimeter trail and then access any of the arteries that are going out into the county, we're accomplishing that goal of keeping people in town. There was discussion of wanting to include restrooms, parking, and informational kiosks at a couple different points along this perimeter trail. Some places that were identified for that just for ease of use, they already exist, were the Visitor Center, Kendall right here, maybe Memorial Park. So just trying to figure out some places where we can provide those types of services to the folks that are utilizing our trail system. Project number 2 is the Urban Trail Network, and that is actually the street grid itself that's shaded there. And we're talking about sidewalks, streets, undeveloped right-of-ways, footpaths, basically anywhere you might go walk your dog around town or use as an access to some of the other trails surrounding the community. That's our Urban Trail Network. There was discussion about wanting to have a few pedestrian bridges, possibly up by the Lackawanna, possibly down on the south end of town, and this provides access to that perimeter trail that was project number 1. And I do want to emphasize as well, these projects are numbered, but it's not a priority number. It's simply a way for us to catalog so that we can have easy language to talk about them. And in general, we're looking at the things that are closer into town are lower numbers, and the further out you get into the county, those are higher numbers. But it's not necessarily the order we might work on developing any trails, if that makes sense. Project number 3 is a river walk. This again is a concept that has been around for a while. It was in the 2004 plan, and I've seen it in numerous other documents as well. We're talking about wanting trail on both sides of the Animas River. Again, Lackawanna down to the railroad trestle is probably our north-south boundaries on that, and needing pedestrian bridges to get over the river. There was discussion in the Kendall visioning sessions about a whitewater park. That was actually the number 3 summer priority. So that would be something that could potentially fit into a Riverwalk plan. And the other thing that the Trails Task Force thought would be great is to have some interpretive signage that talks about the flora, the fauna, the geology, the history of the area, because this might be something that is utilized by a lot of our day visitors, people who aren't here for a long period of time, just an easy stroll along the river. Project number 4 is the Anvil Mountain Trail Network, and there obviously are quite a number of trails already up on Anvil Mountain. What the group focused on was finding some connectivity between some different elements. So places where a trail would peter out, how do we connect that up to make a loop? And then also, we'll talk later on in the discussion about the Rainbow to Red Mountain Pass project, and then also wanting to be able to have easier access to the the Colorado Trail and South Mineral. So some of the work that could be done in here could help facilitate that. Project number 5 is the Kendall Mountain Trail Network. And so we've got a really giant purple blob, and then it's hard to see, I apologize in this image, but there is a dotted line, kind of a little subsection there. And so what we have going on are 2 things. Number 1, the dotted line is the study area that we were looking at for the Kendall Mountain Recreation Area Master Plan. So that's the area that the viability study addressed, and we just wanted to call it out on the map so you could see what that is in comparison to what the Trails Task Force was looking at. So within that bubble within a bubble, we're talking about those hiking and biking trails that I mentioned earlier. The community really wants to see hiking and mountain biking on Kendall. There was discussion as well about an interpretive trail at the base and possibly an expanded bike park. Some of you know we have a little pump track here. There are ideas floating around about doing something a little bit bigger than that. So the larger purple blob that you see there is the Kendall Mountain Massif, and that is basically, we've identified that there's a lot of great trails there, but we've identified that for stuff we might want to improve. So to make the user experience a little better, doing some trail work up there. Project number 6 is Storm Peak. Again, a really large area that we've identified based on the community feedback that we got. And in this particular area, there were 2 things that we really felt like we needed to address as far as mitigating conflict. One was the Headgate Road, so that is, if you think about where the water towers are, out to the start of the Boulder Gulch Trail. Wanting to put some signage there explaining trail etiquette, possibly provide a separate trail for bikes. We have a lot of walkers, hikers, equestrians that tend to utilize that stretch. And so that was an effort to deal with that a little bit and separate some uses. And then the other thing as well is the Boulder Gulch Trail. We've had some discussion about a separate trail for bikes on that so that your hikers aren't necessarily being surprised by bikes coming down the trail at high speed. Project number 7 is, again, a bubble within a bubble. So we had the larger bubble, and now we have this smaller area. This is being proposed to be developed specifically for mountain bike trails. Silverton Single Track Society, which is our local mountain bike organization, recently proposed to the county that they do a study here. So there's a joint study that's funded by Single Track and the county happening as we speak. The International Mountain Biking Association was out here this fall to actually study that, walk it, examine it. They are working on some planning right now that I believe we'll have in hand in January sometime. And the idea is a bike optimized trail network with trails that appeal to different ability levels, because we're trying to draw families here and have something for everyone. It would be easily accessible from town, and I think part of the idea as well is if we provide specific places for mountain bikes to go, that might alleviate some tension in other places. Project number 8 is the Gladstone Loop, and the coloring is kind of hard to see, but it's this little orange finger that kind of goes up around the side of that larger blob we were just talking about. The idea is a loop or lollipop that goes along County Road 110, potentially on both sides, at least for part of it. The idea is to be able to get people out, to be able to access some of the trails from the backside there. And then also going along with that, we have another finger going the other way around, which is the Arastra to Eureka Loop, and that would allow access out to the Eureka campground as well as the other side of all of the trails in that center area. Project number 10, Ophir Columbine to Black Bear. So the idea here is to create a loop that allows people to take the Ophir Road up and connect into the Columbine Lake Trail to make a loop. There is also discussion about wanting to improve the trail that runs from Columbine Lake up to Black Bear Pass. The group did discuss the idea of potentially saying this should be, or making a recommendation that this should be a quiet use area. And the reason for that is, I think with Ice Lakes getting as much traffic as it is, folks were thinking that this lake would be kind of the next item on the list for people's, hit list of what they wanted to hike. And we're going to start seeing increased use on this since people want a less crowded trail experience than Ice Lakes. Well, that's going to make this more crowded. So potentially pulling back some use over there. Project number 11, the Rainbow Route to Red Mountain Pass. This is basically taking the Rainbow Route, which is running on Anvil, and going all the way up to Red Mountain Pass. And this can connect both to the prior project we just talked about and the one we're about to talk about, number 12, wrong way, which is South Mineral to Bear Creek. So this is a pretty exciting project in my mind because it could provide a connection to the Colorado Trail that we don't currently have. Right now, people hiking on the Colorado Trail don't have an easy way to get into Silverton. So our idea here is basically to utilize the Bear Creek Trail as that access. There's a landowner out in South Mineral. Some of you may know Dennis Stenslein. He's the guy who's doing the glamping operation out there. He is working on a project where he would provide a bridge on his property and then a connector trail that he's calling the Ruby Trail that would be both on private and Forest Service land and connect to the Bear Creek Trail. And so that would hopefully allow the Forest Service to consider recognizing the Bear Creek Trail and adopting it into its trail system. Right now it is not considered a system trail, and I think part of the issue there is the private property. So Dennis did just apply for a GOCO grant for this purpose, and I believe the decisions will be handed out in March, so more info to come on that. Project number 13, Silverton to Mullis to Andrews Lakes. So the 2004 trail plan did call out connections between the town of Silverton and Mullis Lakes. As you guys know, the town operates a campground up at Mullis Lake. It makes sense to maybe provide some connectivity there. And this group actually thought it would make sense to then go a little further and provide connectivity between Mullis and Andrews. So there was discussion about bike-friendly single track up there. One of our challenges is going to be the highway crossing, but I don't think it's an insurmountable challenge. We just need to figure it out. And then this would also provide some connectivity to the Colorado Trail. And project number 14 is the Hard Rock 100 route, which is, those guys are hoping to gain a National Scenic Trail designation. Several of the connectors that we've identified in the trail plan are segments of this trail that they would like to work on a bit more. So speaking of connectors, what is a connector? The idea here is short trail segments, and they create better connections between existing trails. So probably fairly easy projects to knock out, depending upon where they're located, I guess. But, and since they are small and short distances, they're really hard to see in this format. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on this slide, but basically a lot of these are included in the discussions earlier on in the projects. Some exceptions to that would be the Lime Creek Trail to the Colorado Trail. And then, you know, I see a lot of things in here that are hard rock. The Mullis Pass to Andrews Lake connector. There's some elements in here that you would find in the Anvil plan. So that's kind of the idea with the connectors, is just like, where does a trail peter out, or where is there not a good connection, and how could we make a nice loop for people? So, and again, much better representation on the large map. So next steps in this process, we are going to be accepting public comment through January 1st. I do have some paper versions of a survey for you guys to fill out if you're interested in doing so tonight. We will also have the surveys and printouts of the plan in Town Hall if you want to pop in and take a look at it there. And then there's a link here for an online version of that stuff, as well as the interactive map that I mentioned earlier. And I do have some little slips of paper on your way out with that URL on them if you want to grab them. And the goal here is to get community feedback, see if there's anything glaringly obvious that we missed or that we need to correct, and then bring it to our town and county governments for adoption, and then on to our land managers so that they can utilize it in their planning efforts. So that's what I have for you guys tonight. I'm happy to entertain any questions. If any of my Trails Task Force folks want to chime in on some of the projects they're more familiar with, I'd love to hear from you as well in answering these questions, or calling out stuff that I didn't specifically mention in my presentation. And then again, I would invite people to grab a cup of coffee, a cookie, check out the maps, check out the printouts of the plan, and give us any feedback or questions you might have. Any questions? Thank you. And I want to thank the task force and the community at large, because you guys, it wouldn't happen without your efforts too. Charlie.
Can we just see the last slide you had up there? I think it's 14. Oh no, the connectors.
The connectors.
Yeah. Okay, just a minute.
Yes.
So it can only be hydrogen.
Right. And so what I want to emphasize with a lot of this is, like, we haven't necessarily drilled down into those details. There's private property, there's wilderness, there's stuff like that that will need to be addressed with each of these individual elements. So yeah, thank you.
Which of these projects present the least amount of coordination between different stakeholders? Or sort of BLM project? Which one is purely BLM? Which one is, are there any ones that have an easier pathway than other ones?
So Mike wants to know if any of these have an easier pathway than other ones. Certainly being able to work with a single land manager would make the process easier. A lot of our lands that have been identified on that map are actually BLM lands. And if you guys haven't met Andy Welsh tonight, where are you, Andy? I know you're here. There he is. This is our new BLM guy in town who's going to be helping with rec planning and land management in the area. So I'm super excited to have him in town, as a lot of other people are, because I think that'll help smooth the process out as far as the BLM stuff. I don't know if that thoroughly answers your question, but yeah, the ones that are just in one land manager's bucket would be the easier. Yeah. Well, you can look at the map and see them. I mean, for example, without actually walking over there to the map, I know that like the Storm Peak Massif, that one is all BLM land. The Kendall Mountain stuff is all BLM except for some private parcels in there. One of the things that's really nice about the segment that Silverton Single Track is looking at is that there's very little private land there. So that would be one that might be able to move forward a little more quickly because we wouldn't have to jump those hurdles. But yeah, I mean, we've looked at it. I would be hard pressed to go through every project and give you that right now though. But yeah, I saw another hand somewhere. Julie.
A process question. So once we submit comments, is there going to be a round to review how you address those comments?
So the thought process there was that the Trails Task Force would sit down and review the comments, and then if we're seeing things recurring and things that feel like they need some attention, that we would address them. And then that particular draft, I don't know that we have time to do another round of public comment in order to enable the BLM to move forward in the way that they need to. They're hoping to start their process in January and wrap it up in July, I think. So, you know, I think that we've had a lot of public comment leading up to this. We're going to get more now, and then, you know, I think we have a well-rounded group of people that will be considering the feedback we do get. So,
well, could you consider having more hiking people? Because it seems like your group is pretty focused on mountain bike and not focusing on...
I don't see it as focused on mountain bike. Single Track is the only mountain bike specific organization. Hard Rock is, while they may not be hikers, they are foot traffic. You participated in the user conflict focus group that we did where we had some equestrian folks come in and talk to us and a few more hikers. So, you know, I can think of at least 3 people that are on that task force that are more hiking focused. So I don't feel like it's slanted one way or another. I don't know if that's the public perception that it is. I think that the group did, even the hikers wanted to embrace mountain biking just because of the economic potential there. So I don't know if that addresses your question or your concern, but I do think we have a good, well-rounded group of people. Ken?
Most of these trails are already used. Some of them are well established. What we were trying to do here is document these trails to preserve our rights to use them. And so, say like the Moles past the Andrews Lake Trail is very well established. And almost all of these are used by people now.
Exactly, and that in the initial visioning sessions, you know, the question that we had for people was, give us everything you know about, whether it's a formal trail or not, even if it's a goat path and it's something that has historically been used, we want to know about it for exactly that reason, and the 2004 Trails Plan also mentions that, so.
And we haven't touched usage at all, just to help answer Julie's question. We've left that as it is status quo. So it's the trail is multi-use for everyone, for non-motorized.
Were there other questions? I thought I saw more hands. Steve?
Yeah, I think most of these trails are historic anyhow. They were developed over 100 years ago by miners. So I guess probably some of them are not used very much. So we really clean those trails up, I guess, and establish them as a network. Which I think is great, but we have to realize that these trails have been around for a long time.
Absolutely. Steve's point, if you couldn't hear him in the back, was a lot of these trails have been around for a long time. It's what Ken just said. They already exist, a lot of it. And when we went into our initial community visioning sessions, that's exactly what we said. Is like, we want to know what exists. And it's more about figuring out ways to either fix up what exists that's not getting utilized properly, find those connections. I think that'll make our process of actually implementing things a lot easier because we're not doing a whole lot of building from scratch. There's a few areas where we may be talking about that. For example, the Single Track Society's mountain bike project, or the stuff on Kendall, where we're talking about potentially some mountain bike specific trails. But the majority of what we're looking at already exists. You're absolutely right.
Also, I didn't see things like a regional trail. You know, that's when you're from the very end of South Mill, goes across the mountains, and basically gets over to a regional.
Just because it wasn't identified by the group doesn't mean it's not on our maps. The stuff that we're talking about tonight is simply, or that you see in this plan, is simply what the Trails Task Force thought we should focus on in, say, the next 10 years on developing stuff in this area. And quite honestly, to develop all of what you're seeing on that map is a really ambitious goal for 10 years, but it gives the community a variety of things to choose from when we start talking about what to prioritize. And again, that focus was trails that will funnel into Silverton and allow this to be our jumping off point. But there's lots of great trails out there, and the Rico Trail is one of my favorites, so yeah. Charlie?
Just going back to your e-bike issue, you're saying you're not going to dwell on that right now, but aren't a number of forests and BLM areas having some issues right now with the e-bikes on certain trails?
I think I would defer to our land managers that we have in the room tonight to maybe speak to that issue a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure that there's forests that have issues with e-bikes, but for us right now as a policy, it's considered motorized. That's kind of where we're at. There is some direction potentially coming down from the Bureau or from the department actually that there can make a differentiation between like throttle versus pedal assist, but yes, we will have to address it, I think, at this time.
You know, I heard this summer that e-bike was up in the wilderness area, and I just think we better address it now rather than later, which I would think.
Well, I think we are addressing it just by saying we're not going there right
Because
now.
we don't get a say, it's up to the Forest Service and the BLM ultimately, what their prerogative is on that, as it's, because it's federal land for everyone, not just us here in the community. So I think Andy probably would be open to feedback and hearing from people about that. It's really not our decision. It's our decision in town, you know, and that kind of thing, but
And
just
that
want to
will be
clarify that.
a big part of the travel management plan for us is talking about use designation, or saying something that Disney's not allowed use-wise. It's one of the more contentious things we do, so.
Other questions? I saw a hand. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of the agencies already, the Bureau of Forest Service, and I'm just wondering, has there been any communication or feedback from like Division of Wildlife or anybody like that?
Not at this point, and again, I think that's one of those things that as we start digging in on individual projects, all of those will need to go through some specific planning, and once we start identifying more what we want to do in those areas, those types of agencies would get involved. I mean, all of this has to go through the proper public process for sure. I saw Fetch, another hand back there.
I'm glad to hear that you guys are at least kind of addressing impacts, especially like Ice Lake. I think you need to do more because, and you can read just numerous articles. There's a lot out there right now. We are loving our wilderness to death. And Ice Lake is a great example. Mary's Crater Lake. So I think you also need to address those impacts by opening or connecting trails. You are going to put many more people in that. And with today's media, with Facebook and different things, GPS, people are letting everybody know where these places are. So if you, theory is if you build it, they will come. You have to be able to address the impacts. A great example, you're talking over Columbine Lake, Black Bear Pass. There are some very pristine areas, and they're especially upper Porphyry Gulch, that trail will have to go across, and now you're going to put hundreds of people, because you've advertised it, into an area that is super pristine, and San Miguel County is also doing the loop. They're already doing it illegally, riding across the tundra in Porphyry Gulch by coming Black Bear, Porphyry, Columbine Lake, and then back down Whiteville. So you're having a double impact from two counties in some of these very pristine areas. Another danger is talking about the designation of the Hard Rock 100 as a national scenic trail. The minute you designate a national monument or trail system or anything like that, it gets heavily advertised. A great example is Canyons of the Ancients. There didn't used to be a soul down there most of the time around Sand Canyon. The minute it was turned into a monument, it is totally overrun. I will not even go near that place now. So I think we have to be very careful about impacts. If you make these trail systems, like connecting Bear Creek to the Colorado Trail, you're going to put a lot more people in these areas. That sounds great economically, but doesn't sound great for the aesthetic values that we moved here for.
Thanks, Betch, and that's why we're looking to get public comment. So if there are particular areas that you're concerned about, any of you, we want to hear about that, right? Hand in the back.
So one example whom I admire is Dolores LaChapelle, whose secret name for the Cimarrons was the Chinese mountains, just so nobody knew what she was talking about. So I'll just put it in perspective, because you're about to pop the cork, you know.
I think another thing to remember is we're going to be doing well to pull off a couple of these trail plans. Like, there's not that much money or people out there just to make it all magically happen. You know, if we get one trail going, we can probably look at how that is impacted to address some of Fetch's concerns. But this stuff isn't all going to pop up overnight.
Right, this is the 30,000-foot view.
Yeah.
And again, the long-term vision, not like it's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years. Yeah. Other comments or questions? Julie.
But to Fetch's point, a lot of these are, going to be ended up on the internet, and you're going to have those impacts whether the trails are in the system or created or what. You start putting it out there on the internet, it happens.
Yeah, and I think that is something that we can't necessarily even control. So I think planning for it and providing education and adequate signage, and also potentially dispersing people to places so that certain areas are not so heavily impacted may be a good thing. But again, all of this needs to be weighed and balanced. The economic interests of the community, the fact that all of us, many of us anyway, who live here love solitude, and that's part of what attracts us to this place. How do we balance all those competing things and prevent things from being overused? But I do think, sorry, Mel, go ahead.
Yes, just to touch on what you're saying, I do think it's important that we all ask how much development do we want? What do we want the end result of the community to look like? And work back from there. So, instead of just sort of charging out to address the usage and overpopulation issue, do we want just a little bit of comfortable growth and see how that goes? So I think that is something we need to sort of look at. What's the end result we want? What do we want the economic development piece of this and the infiltration of people to look like? And so we can manage it and not have it be something maybe people don't want.
Absolutely, and I think the community still needs to prioritize. We haven't prioritized this list of projects. So that I think is coming next. Obviously the single track project is already kind of rolling as far as the study. That may be one of the first things that gets implemented because of that. But anything else that we're doing, we're going to spend some time sorting out. David, did I see a hand in the back?
Yeah, it's a bit of a conundrum, we want people to come here because of the economic reasons, but I think the bottom line, the driver, needs to be what's going to benefit the community that lives here first. That's the number one priority. Not just the money, but people who are living here.
Right, and that the money is one piece of the puzzle, but the quality of life for the people who live here is another big piece of that puzzle. Becky, did you have a hand?
I just want to say thanks for all of your hard work. I think this has been a long time coming. I just love the energy that's spent towards this. The perimeter trail, I think would be, I hope, an amazing low-hanging fruit that would not only benefit just your average visitor that comes to town that may not be able to hike 2 or 3 hours up in the mountains, people of all abilities, ages, and then also just for our community's health, that it's accessible. So that's one that I feel like, could serve everybody really well, and especially in the winter when we are isolated and we need a perimeter walking trail. And so I really like that idea. Again, thanks for all the hard work of everybody that's working on this. And I really think that it's just so complicated that we all need to be on good behavior about this because it's just touchy and we want it to continue to go forward and just work together. And thanks for being so receptive about comments and suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's about the community, right? It's not about any one interest group, and we need to figure out how to work together so that everybody's needs are met. And there may need to be some compromise involved in that process, but yeah, I'm encouraged by what I see in the community anyway, and in terms of how this process has unfolded. And I just want to turn back that thanks to everybody who was on the task force and spent endless hours working on this project with me. And there'll be more work to come. So, any other thoughts before we move into surveys? Fetch?
Have you guys addressed winter trails? You know, as far as, I mean, a winter cross-country run would easily be on some of these trails. Are you guys also addressing winter trails at the same time?
This plan doesn't specifically dig into that in detail. There has been some discussion of like the perimeter trail as being a good thing to utilize for winter use. And I know that in the 2004 plan, there was discussion about the Silverton to Mullis Lake potentially being a snowmobile route in the wintertime. We haven't really tackled that issue. I think that may be a separate planning process to deal with winter uses. And that, you know, it's quite a can of worms when you start getting into this. And I do think that deserves a full scoping process and as much attention as this process has gotten. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you for coming out tonight and sharing your thoughts. Anthony Culpepper, raise your hand if you have questions about the maps. Anthony has been really instrumental in getting these maps drafted for us. He's your go-to guy on that. Any of our Trails Task Force members, raise your hands. They're not listening, some of them. You can feel free to ask any of us questions as well. And we'll be hanging out for a little while here, letting you guys look at the big version of the maps, printouts of the plan, fill out your surveys, or go do it online. So thanks again, everyone.